Recently, I've come across two cases in two different countries, thousands of miles apart, which are a reminder to me of the severe human rights abuses that go on under Islamic theocracies. And I'm going to read out a bit about both cases, and then reflect on how we in secular democracies, or at least liberal democracies, the secular aspect's debatable, but at least in liberal democracies, should approach this sort of situation. So without further ado, I'm going to read out a bit about both these cases. I'm not going to read out the whole report just for time reasons, but I'll certainly put links to them. So the first one I'm going to read out is from Pakistan, and it's from Deutsche Welle newspaper, the German newspaper Deutsche Welle, if I can pronouncing that right. Pakistan, man accused of blasphemy shot dead at court trial. A man accused of committing blasphemy under a controversial Pakistani law has been killed while standing trial. It is the latest in a series of such extrajudicial killings in the country. A Pakistani man was arrested on Wednesday after he entered a courtroom in the northwestern city of Peshawar and shot and killed another man who was standing trial for blasphemy. The man on trial was facing charges of having insulted the Muslim Prophet Muhammad, an offence that carries the maximum sentence of death under the country's blasphemy laws. The suspect told police that he had been ordered to carry out the killing by Muhammad because the accused had belonged to the Ahmadiyya faith, a minority that Pakistan declared non-Muslim in 1974 for regarding its founder Ghulam Ahmad as a prophet. In Orthodox Islam, there can be no prophets after Muhammad. The group, which numbers some 4 million members, has faced persecution for decades. A spokesman for the group later said that while the man was born in Ahmadi, he had since left the community. One police officer, Azmat Khan, told the Associated Press that the accused had himself claimed to be Islam's prophet and had been arrested on blasphemy charges 2 years ago. Um, Now, I believe in this case, it doesn't mention it in this report, but I come across another report that actually stated the killer, that is the man who shot the defendant, was treated as a hero. And I could well believe that because there is many other cases in Pakistan with similar results, such as the assassination of Governor Salman Taseer some years ago. When his killer was executed, he was treated as a hero. Now, just to recap, Governor Taseer had defended a Christian woman. I believe it was actually Aja Bibi. And for that, he paid with his life. He was a Muslim governor, but he paid with his life for being a decent human being and standing up for Pakistan's minorities. Um, Needless to say, that goes against the very philosophy of Muhammad Ali Jinnah um, and his vision of a secular Pakistan. Then the other case is via the BBC, and it's as follows. It's from Nigeria. Nigerian singer sentenced to death for blasphemy in Kano State. A musician in Nigeria's northern state of Kano has been sentenced to death by hanging for blaspheming against the Prophet Muhammad. An upper Sharia court in Hasawa Filin Hockey area of the state said Yahawa Sharif-Aminu, 22, was guilty of committing blasphemy for a song he circulated via WhatsApp in March. Mr. Sharif-Aminu did not deny the charges. Judge Kadi Aliyu Muhammad Khani said he could appeal against the verdict. States across Muslim-majority northern Nigeria use both secular laws and Sharia law, which do not apply to non-Muslims. Only one of the death sentences passed by Nigeria's Sharia courts has been carried out since they were reintroduced in 1999. But this doesn't mention that in recent years, thousands of Christians have been killed by violence in Nigeria. Now, it's worked both ways. There have also been Muslims killed in sectarian violence. But these two cases show the fact that where you have blasphemy laws, you have no freedom of expression. In the latter case, it's interesting that the musician is admitting the charges, or rather, he's not denying them. That's very brave. Um, but maybe some sort of way of lessening the sentence, I don't know. Um, but here's the thing, it is irrefutable that there is massive intolerance under Islamic theocracies. Pakistan's a glaring example of it. So, what I would say to nationalistic Pakistanis when they feel their country is being maligned, look at cases like this. You know, when you have a defendant shot dead in a courtroom, and I'm aware the gunman was arrested, but how do you think this comes across to the rest of the world? And to those who say I'm generalizing, I know Pakistan's a country of 200 million people. I know there's moderate Pakistanis who hate the fact that there is this image with their country, but I'm afraid they cannot argue that this is not a minority fringe opinion. I think that would be disingenuous to try and argue that. The reality of the matter is, in societies like Pakistan, religious extremism is mainstream. I'm just going to say that. And in those societies, it isn't extremism. It's normal. That's the acceptable point of view. What they consider to be extreme is the idea of blaspheming. I remember I had a contact from Algeria. He wasn't a friend. We were in some mutual group. We were briefly connected on Facebook. And he once came out with a comment like, that is a blasphemy. I forget what the context was. But he wasn't even joking. He was being deadly serious. This was a young guy. And I just find it very alien to think that this is something that people can actually believe in the 21st century. Um, and I do think that there is a difference between Islam and other faiths. And this is why every religion has extremists, right? So, of course, there's Christian extremists. Of course, there are Hindu extremists. I mean, right now, India is a good example of, or a bad example, of the ugly face of Hindu extremism. And we see the very, very severe human rights abuses from caste discrimination. Some Indians are still in denial about that. You know, when that's brought up, they'll say, oh, no, no, it doesn't happen anymore in India. Well, it does. Um, I saw a disturbing report about two young boys, children, who had accidentally stepped onto temple's sacred steps, and for this, they were stripped naked, they had their heads shaved, and they were tied up to a post. Within Christianity, you see the extreme homophobia in certain African countries, Uganda, for example, in which they use Old Testament logic to justify that. Um, Certainly in parts of the Bible Belt of the United States. But I would still suggest that for the most part in Western countries, you're not going to get into trouble for criticizing Christianity. You're not going to get your life threatened for mocking Jesus. And I defy anyone to say that there's any logical comparison between that situation in a liberal democracy versus perceived insults to the Prophet Muhammad in an Islamic country. I defy anyone to say with a straight face that there is a comparison. And I've seen this. I've seen people trying to say, oh, well, it's all, they try to make a moral equivalency. So what I'm saying is, yes, every religion has its extremists, but I do think within Islam, it's guaranteed. Where there is an Islamic majority, intolerance is guaranteed. Guaranteed. I don't think you can claim that in countries that have a Christian majority. Although, to be fair, in much of Western Europe, there has definitely been a move towards or away from organized religion in general. But even in the United States, if we take the United States as an example, where there is still a large percentage of the population are practicing Christians, I dare say that many evangelical Christians in the Bible Belt, they might be quite conservative on issues like gay rights and abortion, but I very much doubt they would demand the death penalty for people criticizing Christianity. Um, and those atheists who try to make moral equivalencies between all faiths, I would say you're not paying attention. Okay, you may have had an argument with your Christian neighbor, but and you may think your Christian neighbor has insane ideas and even very intolerant ideas. But I insist that Islam is the intolerance and violence within Islam is on a bigger scale than the other examples. Yes, there is violence. We've seen it this year within Hinduism, but I would argue that's more or less restricted to India. It hasn't spread to other countries. Buddhism, yeah, you see that. Thailand, or excuse me, in Myanmar. I would say that pan-Islamist extremism is unique. Now, when this is brought up, the go-to for apologists is always, oh, it's got nothing to do with Islam. So when you point to terrorist groups like Boko Haram or Islamic State, you name it, they'll always say it's got nothing to do with Islam. I have a big problem with that. I think it's dishonest. I don't think you could deal with a problem by just pretending it doesn't exist. And I totally understand Muslims don't want to be associated with those groups, but I don't think it helps to say they've got nothing to do with Islam. In the end of the day, like it or not, they feel that they are Muslims. They might be distorting the Quran. Others would say they're being literal about it. And I think there's some weight to that argument. I think, there are segments of the Quran that do preach death to disbelievers. So one could argue actually it's the likes of the Islamic State and Boko Haram and so on that are being literalist. Um, but regardless, I do not think it is open-minded to say, oh, it's got nothing to do with Islam. Here's the thing, it's wrong to vilify all Muslims because of extremism within Islam. But I don't think that opposing that should extend to being dishonest about the problem. And I really find it very unfortunate that many so-called liberals in the West would rather virtue signal and would rather be politically correct about this than put human rights before religious sensitivities. There are examples in this world where Muslims are persecuted. The most glaring example right now is China and what's happening to the Uyghur people. That is an abomination against humanity. But what has the response been from the Islamic world? Deafening silence for the most part. In fact, some Islamic majority countries have openly defended China and they've even signed deals with the Chinese regime. So the idea of the Ummah is a travesty. That's why when you get demagogues like Erdogan and on some level Imran Khan in Pakistan and former Malaysian leader Mahathir Mohamad, when they push demagoguery in different ways, but they're all pushing it, particularly Erdogan, um, it's the hypocrisy is staggering. It's on a different scale of hypocrisy. When Erdogan points fingers at Western countries for supposed Islamophobia, but he largely turns a blind eye to what China's doing. I mean, I think he's a despicable figure. I think there's definitely fascistic elements to the way Erdogan conducts himself. Uh, but to be fair, a lot of Turks realize this. I have Turkish friends who can't stand Erdogan. They feel he's bad for their country and they're right. Um, he's certainly destroying the legacy of Kemal Ataturk in terms of really, really trying hard to push back against Turkey's secular values. We've seen this with the transition of the Hagia Sophia into a mosque again, and a host of other things. But here's the question I want to summarize this with. We see those grotesque violations of human rights going on in Islamic countries. And the idea of Islam being peaceful and tolerant is, to me, a joke, a bad joke. And I will not apologize for saying that. To those Muslims who say that's bigotry, it's a pity you feel that way. I would simply say to you, the issue here is not just about terrorist groups that call themselves Islamic. Um, the sort of things I'm talking about are mainstream. So many people in Pakistan will condemn terrorism. Of course they will. But simultaneously, they will say, but blasphemers should be executed. Oh, as long as it's by court of law, don't kill them. Just make sure it's legal. They still believe that blasphemers should die. Now that to me is a totally alien mentality, totally alien. But I can almost accept the extremism in logic in those countries more than I can accept the cowardice, the moral cowardice of some liberals and some so-called progressives in the West who will not talk about this. They're too politically correct to talk about it because they think if they talk about Islamic extremism and they talk about human rights abuses going on in Islam, then it's offensive to Muslims and therefore, oh, we better not because they're a minority. What I would say is we have Muslims are part of our society. There's many proud, patriotic British Muslims who contribute to our society and they love this country. But there are many others who have values that don't correspond to Western liberal values. And it's delusional for anyone to pretend that that isn't the case. When the government tries to do something about extremism, for example, with the Prevent program, you get the predictable usual parties, the likes of Five Pillars and others, who constantly try to find an angle to portray that as Islamophobic. My point to them, to those self-described Muslim community leaders and others, would be, what are you actually doing productively to stop extremism? Okay, maybe you have, if you're an imam, maybe you have expelled radicals from your mosque. Good, that's welcome. But if you're demanding special treatment, then that isn't really helpful. If you're conflating criticism of Islam with bigotry towards Muslims, that is not helping. That is why we need to be very, very scrutinizing of any such legislation that can shackle freedom of expression when it comes to religion, such as the new Scottish bill. It needs to be heavily scrutinized. The irony about that Scottish bill promoted by the SNP is that it was supposedly meant to overturn Scotland's archaic blasphemy laws. I mean, this is an interesting thing. A lot of European countries still actually have blasphemy laws and statute. It's just that they're never prosecuted these days. I mean, it's only recently that Ireland got rid of its blasphemy laws, but realistically, in the modern world, it's highly, highly unlikely people are going to be prosecuted over blasphemy laws based on Christianity. But what is troubling is when legislation is ostensibly designed to protect minorities, and you think, okay, well, that's not a bad thing. It's protecting minorities from hate, but there needs to be a very clear differentiation between protecting minorities from, for example, racial hatred or discrimination because of their faith versus prosecuting people for candidly expressing their dislike of a religion. So I insist there is a world of difference between someone saying they dislike Islam, a non-Muslim saying that, and even ridiculing Islam or saying that they feel that the Prophet had a violent record, etc. Even if it's offensive, there has to be protection to do that. In a democracy, there has to be right to offend, short of expressing threats or bullying. I do believe that if we as a society are to believe in true freedom of expression, this is not to say it should be boundless. It's not to say that there's no responsibility. But recently, for example, the Metropolitan Police suggested that they would stop using the term Islamic terrorist attack or Islamist terrorist attack. If they go ahead with that, and if it's ostensibly for the purpose of not wanting to offend people, it's pathetic. Utterly, utterly pathetic. We have to be honest, and we have to stop assuming that robust criticism of Islam does not equate to hatred of Muslims. I think it's totally compatible to say um, we have a society where Muslims should be free to practice their faith in the mosques, read their Qurans, and identify as Muslims and so on, without imposing dogma onto others, without saying you have no right to criticize Islam. I don't think it's a good enough of an excuse to say, oh, it's hurtful for us when people criticize the Prophet. Because sensitivities, in my opinion, can be used as an excuse. I regard freedom of expression as more important than sensitivities, ultimately. Of course, there's responsibility with freedom of expression. So if you get someone saying that all Muslims are the same and they hate them, that is hate speech and that's wrong. And that should be tackled because that can lead to, um, hateful attacks. But I am very concerned that we are going too far in the direction of conflating discrimination against people with criticism of faith. And I don't even think it should be like, oh, the criticism needs to be very polite and very polished. I think if someone believes that Islam is a violent religion, they should have a right to say so. And the onus should be on Muslims to prove them wrong. If they really feel so strongly about it, instead of just demanding that they're silenced, then debate them. Prove them wrong. Prove me wrong. But the things I've spoken about are things happening in this world today. And it's scary. I find it scary that in the year 2020, people can be killed over faith. I think it's repugnant. I think the sort of human rights abuses that go on under religion are repugnant. And I think every religion is guilty, but I do believe Islam is the worst. Um, Today, at least. Um, I wouldn't share the view of certain far right people who want Islam banned. I think that's extreme. I think we don't make ourselves better than Islamic theocracies by replicating China. So part of democracy and a free society is also freedom of faith. So I support the right of Muslims to have their faith and to practice in the mosque and so on. But there must be a strong caveat with that the right to express faith or the right to have a faith should not extend to imposing that on others. That's a very, very important thing. And I don't care what Islamic teachings are in that regard, they do not trump our values. And if you're watching this and you're a Muslim and you're saying, well, Western secular values go against the teachings of Islam, I would say to you, leave. Quite honestly. If you honestly think our society is not for you, if you have the means, leave. Because some of us do recognize that there is a problem going on here, and we won't be silenced. I will always speak out against discrimination or prejudice against any individuals, or rather against any collective groups. That's more accurate. But I will not be silenced for politically correct reasons by people who themselves are too cowardly to tell the truth. So some people who will freely mock Christianity, some atheists do this, but then they get a bit cagey when it comes to Islam. I say, stop being cowards, be consistent. And that's all there is to it. I'm not making out that I am really radical here. I'm not stupid. I wouldn't go to an Islamic country and say these things because I'm not that brave and I'm not that reckless. But I have enormous, enormous respect for people who do go against the system in those countries because their courage is profound. Um, and so long as countries like Pakistan continue to persecute minorities, or at least not sufficiently protect minorities, then they really, really have no right to be whining about so-called Islamophobia in the West. So I do believe that when Pakistan or other Islamic countries make official complaints about this, as they sometimes do, when they try to push this in the UN, we need to be a lot more vocal in retorting. And I don't think we are. Whether that's for oversensitive reasons, whether it's for trade reasons, whatever it is, we need to be more vocal in defending human rights in that regard. So the next time Karachi, or rather Islamabad, criticizes Britain for supposed Islamophobia, we need to throw it right back at them and say, well, come back to us when you deal with the persecution in your midst. Um, there is a big British Pakistani population, and it's something we need to value. But I will always, always, always say that Western values and human rights trump religious sensitivities. Absolutely. And for now, I live in a country where religion can be criticized for the most part. But we are seeing a dangerous situation whereby, major social media giants are getting weak at the knees when it comes to Islam. And we're seeing accounts removed because they're deemed to be offensive to Muslims. That's very concerning. Someone said to me that her theory was she is a self-described ex-Muslim. Her theory was that, and I don't know if this is true or not, but Facebook outsources a lot of their monitors to Pakistan. If that's true, that might explain why a lot of posts or pages deemed to be insulting to Muslims get taken down. Some of them might be genuinely hateful. Some of them may simply be criticizing Islam. If it's the latter, that's very, very concerning. Anyway, this has been a bit longer than I expected, but I think it's very, very important. I won't be silenced. In my country, I won't be silenced. So, final words just before I round this up. Um, I've been very vocal about what China is doing to the weaker people. So no one can accuse me of hating Muslims or being anti-Muslims. I will not apologize for condemning and speaking out against barbaric attitudes that absolutely have contempt for basic human rights and put religious sensitivities over that. And I would simply say, if Islam is so great, if it's such an enlightening religion, if it's such a savior, if it saves your soul, why is it so sensitive? Why, for example, does the prophet need to be protected violently? Shouldn't he be so great that he doesn't need to be protected? Think about that.